he's giving him opening remarks, so. Okay, we'll call this Planning Commission meeting to order of February, what is today? February 1st, 2024. We're going to start with opening remarks and a pledge by Nolan Gunnell.
I'll give my opening remarks in the form of a prayer. Our Father in heaven, we come before thee this night. We're grateful for the many blessings which we enjoy. We're grateful for this winter season and the moisture which we've received. Pray that we still may receive more, that it will provide for our use and needs in the summertime. We give thanks for this country and those men and women who currently serve and who have served, who have diligently preserved the freedom and peace in this nation, and we give thanks to them. We pray that we may act in accordance and serve as we should in this position as planning and zoning, and we give thanks for this opportunity in this building in this county. This we give thanks for and pray in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
You'll stand and join me in this Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nolan. Any changes to the agenda, Angie?
There are none, no.
Okay. How about the commissioners, have you had a chance to review the minutes? Have anyone seen any changes there? If not, I would take a motion for both of those.
So moved.
First? Second, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the next two items, consent items, meaning they meet all the requirements of the county for us to approve those without having to discuss those. So unless any of the commissioners have any concerns with either of those or questions on them, I would take a motion to approve consent item 1 and 2, the Moana subdivision First Amendment and the Old Canyon subdivision First Amendment.
I'm just worried about the Old Canyon one myself. We've missed your attendance. We're glad to have you back.
Yeah, if you'd have been here a lot last time, it would be pretty easy to pass it now, so.
We might have to have a speech on this one.
Oh, boy. You don't want that.
We hope it works good for you.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the two consent items, the Ohana Mauna subdivision First Amendment and the Old Canyon subdivision First Amendment.
Okay.
Second that.
Okay, first and a second, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Okay, the next item, Aspen Springs Storage Conditional Use Permit.
Standing up here for the first time, but I feel like I need a step stool or something. It's a little tall. Oh, and for those of you who are don't know Connor Smith is a planner in our office, so he'll kind of be taking over running the show here. So I just want to introduce him. You saw him with the cash resource management plan a couple times here, but he's ready to go. So, anyway, back to the case at hand. So this is a conditional use permit for the Aspen Springs Storage Facility. It's a request to expand an existing self-storage facility and add an outdoor storage yard on 8.77 acres in the industrial zone. This is just south of Smithfield, and yeah, there is two existing storage units on it. At the last meeting, I kind of briefly went over the proposal and mentioned that it was considered an urban development, and so we needed to allow time for Smithfield to respond. We did get that a week and a half or so ago, so we put it on the agenda and it's ready to move forward. They had no objections based on this project proposal. So in 2011 was when the original CUP was approved in the ag zone. And again, the project was originally for 6 buildings, but limited to just 2 due to Smithfield City's opposition at that time. They're now seeking to expand the facility. However, self-storage facilities are no longer allowed in the A10. So you may recall that they were here early last year to get a rezone, and that was approved. So they are currently in the industrial zone, which allows both the self-storage facility and an outdoor storage yard with the approval of a conditional use permit. The properties adjacent to the subject rezone are primarily used for agricultural purposes. As mentioned, the boundary of Smithville is immediately north of this property, and then the airport is located south of the subject property. The current request is to expand the facility in 3 phases with a total of 13 new buildings and an outdoor storage areas. Phase 1 includes the construction of 5 structures. You can see in the staff report that I've labeled those different buildings with their dimensions and height. The letter of intent states that phase 1 will be constructed immediately, and then future phases will be constructed per demand. The phase 2 and 3 areas will be used for outdoor storage until those structures are built for those phases. Phase 2 includes additional 4 structures, and then phase 3 is also 4 structures. And again, all of their dimensions are, I won't go through them specifically. But per the letter of intent, the facility will be accessible to customers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Formal business hours are proposed from 9 to 6:30. And I didn't know if that was every day, Britton, or just Monday through Friday? Or Monday through Saturday. Monday through Saturday. Okay, thanks. There will be 1 employee who will primarily work remotely. And there is a small office as part of the existing structures. There's no caretaker unit on site. And vehicles are limited to those customers renting storage units to load and unload or storing vehicles. They did provide a parking analysis, which hasn't been fully reviewed by Public Works yet, but their assumption in that is that no additional parking will be required. There's sufficient numbers in front of the storage units, so that will be just a condition of approval that Public Works reviews that and approves it. So the conditional use permit allows the Land Use Authority to review the request based on standards and criteria that are defined and include compliance with the law, health, safety, and welfare, adequate service provision, and impacts and mitigation. As mentioned, the 2 uses, storage and warehousing with a storage yard, and then the self-service storage facility, are both allowed with an approved CUP in the industrial zone. And the proposed use is described in their letter of intent, and with the conditions of approval that we've added, they will meet the requirements for these use types in the industrial zone. One point we like to make on these is the industrial zone has an additional setback from all property lines of 30 feet, so there will be no storage of material or placement of structures allowed in those areas. So that is a bit of a buffer. Access is from 4600 North. It's a county facility that provides through access from Highway 91 to 2400 West, including single-family dwellings, commercial properties, and ag lands. It is classified as a minor collector. It is maintained year-round by the county. Based on a review by the county engineer, the road and the site is suited for the proposed use, and no road improvements are being required as part of this project. There is, I guess it's maybe a farm access or a secondary access on the site that Public Works would like to see removed once construction is done. They're only going to be allowed a single permanent access, so that is also a condition of approval. We also look at impacts and mitigation. Known or reasonably anticipated detrimental effects would be noise. Granted that the facility can be accessed 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. The loading and unloading could have the potential to create detrimental amounts of noise. However, given the location of the site, which is surrounded by ag uses and the airport to the south, and if there's a minimal number of single-family residential, it's not anticipated that this use will create detrimental amounts of noise for neighboring property owners. As mentioned, the airport is to the south, and this is located within the airport limitation areas, and so must comply with the county code regarding that. And that includes filing a Form 7460-1 with the FAA to have them do a review and determination of whether there are hazards or impacts to air air navigation due to the proposal. So I think, I believe the applicant is working on getting that filed and a response from the FAA, and it will be a condition of approval that will have to be finalized before the CUP can be recorded. So visually, outdoor storage of vehicles may negatively impact the views from the surrounding roads and properties. The applicant is proposing to install a chain link fence surrounding the property. Development standards in the code require a screen of at least 6 feet in height where industrial lots share a boundary with property zoned A10 or residential. The required screen may be a fence, wall, berm, or approved landscaping, or some combination of the same. Given that the adjacent uses are primarily agriculture and storage is not allowed within those setback areas, staff is recommending that the chain link fence meets the requirements of that code, and the Planning Commission is allowed to find that those requirements can be waived if strict adherence is deemed unnecessary. So I have included that as one of the conclusions. You're welcome to leave that or take that out, depending on how you feel about that screening requirement. Again, I haven't received any written comments from the public, and we did work with Smithfield City to get that written response from them that they have no objections. So with that, staff is recommending approval with the conditions listed, and that completes my report.
Thanks, Angie. Any questions for Angie?
I have one question, just on lighting. Do we have any requirements as far as downward facing lighting?
Yeah, we don't have anything in the code. We typically, and maybe I didn't put it in here, and I can add this, but for lighting, if they're proposing it, we do require dark sky compliance, so.
I'm sorry,
Dark sky compliance.
Dark
with
sky,
the- yeah.
okay.
And if I didn't add that, if I omitted it, yeah, we can certainly add that as a condition, so.
That was just, not particular to this one, but just
Yeah.
seeing others and seeing some of the light issues that we've had there. I thought we ought to make sure that that was there.
Any other questions for Angie?
I've got a couple questions. So, right now, do we know where, so this is in the county, so Smithfield City's fire hydrants wouldn't apply to this.
No.
I had either overlooked or missed, I see on this phase, so if we count the next, or what you're gonna be doing next, pending approval was phase 1. Phase 2 has, I would anticipate, is that a tank?
Yeah, so there's an existing one there now already, and then for the.
Up on the front, by the
Yeah, so
gate?
It's right, well, it's right by the existing detention pond.
Blue square down there.
Oh, the square right
Yeah.
below it, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my only question, because, I mean, I'm sure that we're not where the fire, but just how that deal happened down there in Nibley, how fast that can go up, and as close as these buildings are and the access in there, just want to make sure that that's all.
Yeah, and then it's got
Yeah,
the
so
two
he
hydrants on
worked
there.
with the fire marshal, and that he wanted to add the second tank and
Okay,
that one. 'Cause there's
that was
one-
just my question, because,
Yeah.
is there any hydrants, do you know, along 8th West, like there east of the field, east of you? That's what I was trying to remember. Not that it matters.
Yeah. But I think there's another tank, and then there's also a second hydrant that they can grab from. So we worked with the fire marshal.
The two hydrants there. Be with the hydrant there that pulls from that tank too.
On the
This one
next
this-
phase.
Yeah, on the next phase. So and they do that on distance because they have to be able to pull so far from their truck. So that's why you've got to have the extra ones on there. So first phase, that existing tank will cover it.
That was my only question, Angie, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks, Angie. Does the applicant have any questions or concerns or with the conditions on there?
No, I don't think so.
Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Or if not, we don't have to make him come up.
If this is successful, you gonna move out to Petersboro and give them some competition out there? We might want that.
I hope so.
Okay. Council members, what do you want to do if there's no more questions? Looks like we might need to add that one condition with lighting. It's not in there.
That'd be great.
Chris, the master, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's very helpful. The one thing that can make a big difference, and so, yeah, some dark sky compliant lighting would be a helpful condition to add, in my opinion. If there's nothing else, I'd be happy to make a motion that we approve the Aspen Springs Storage CUP based on the now 16 conditions and 3 conclusions.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I will second the motion.
Okay. Motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, passes unanimously. Okay.
I mean, I've heard a lot about the dark sky compliant. What does it, I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but what does it actually mean?
You know,
It's downward facing, but
That's it.
besides that,
that's really it. It's downward facing, and so you don't get a lot of light pollution. You know, light.
You don't even
just
really know it's there.
going out and-
In Arizona, it's unbelievable.
if they have the,
You know,
Where they have it, you don't even know
for
that
me,
it's
like
there until you're
some of
right
the
on it.
best examples are just new church steakhouses.
It's the temple down there that
They-
surprised me, the
they-
temple.
All of the lighting.
And a lot of them will be like
is
a,
downward.
will be,
instead
a-
of blasting it out.
It just goes down.
and some
You
will
don't
be
even know it's
more,
there.
more of an amber or yellowish color too. Some of them, but yeah, it just depends. Some of them, they even change the color, but I think to be compliant, you just have to be the downward facing. Yep.
That's right.
Now you just gotta get through 16 conditions. Yeah.
Okay, I apologize about being late.
Well, you didn't know we'd be that fast, did you?
Yeah, we had kind of a burning issue that me, Matt, and Taylor needed to talk about, and I think we got it resolved, so I apologize about that. So at our last meeting, we talked a little bit about priorities for this next year, for what we wanted to discuss, what code changes or amendments we felt like were important, and we wanted an opportunity for the Planning Commission to weigh in on those. So we did add a couple from on the list. Partly was from some of the recommendations that the Planning Commission made. We also had a couple members of staff. We talked to Public Works and our review team about some code that they felt like it can be, that we should consider. And so I put them down on the list, and I can talk about those real quick, but really what I'm hoping for today is a potential, any recommendations on priorities that you feel like we should tackle. And granted, after the state's done with changing the law this spring,
You'll have a few
Wait
more.
until after.
yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, they might throw everything out the window, and we may just be obligated to work on whatever they want to work on.
There are a lot of them.
But in the meantime, we can talk about a couple of things. So most of these are similar. Whoa, what did I do?
Just deleted them all.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, I hope not. That would have been.
25 might be a priority.
Yeah, what do you see? Yeah, so private roadway standards, this was one when we brought up, so this would kind of fall in line a little bit with our flag lot ordinance too, because one of the issues that we have is that we require a certain amount of frontage on of a property before we will issue them a zoning clearance or building permit. And there's a lot of properties out there that don't have frontage or they have narrow frontage. And so they end up building a private roadway that they will write an easement to the property owner, who's themselves, and call that their private roadway, and then they'll measure how much of that is within their property and call that frontage. Which is okay, but it does create other problems for us, where we might feel like creating a tighter standard on when we'd allow a private roadway to go through somebody's property, and then allowing more of a flag lot option. We've also had some discussions. Right now, we cap off the number of of homes on a private roadway at 20. That is something that we could also potentially re-examine. If it's under 5, we have a lower standard for what that roadway has to be. Matt can maybe correct me with some of these details, but but that is something that, as we see subdivisions, other developments come through, or we've even had private roadways come in that we wish would have been dedicated to the county because the connectivity would have been nice. And so when I brought this up, one of our staff engineers said, yes, we should do that.
Well, another issue too that I was thinking, and it's not necessarily for a single house, but the Estancia, and there's been a few disaster private roads, but they were for tire subdivisions, and the county still ended up taking them over.
Yeah, that happens quite a bit, where a private road will fall into disrepair. The homeowners association never evolved or whatever agreement, and
A lot of phone calls to elected officials.
Which
Yeah.
doesn't
And then the
do us
county
any
gets
good
involved.
in approving it to start with if it's gonna go that direction.
Yeah. Okay, so we feel like looking at this one as a priority, is that generally speaking, is that there general consensus on that, or?
Yeah, I would support that as one of the top ones to address. For me, ADUs would be
I'm on that
in
one
my
too.
top 3.
Okay,
The flag lot's number 2. I mean, don't know if that's, how big a deal that is, but that could actually, if that's where you're seeing the concerns with the private roads, you could
You were
maybe tie
pairing
that.
it with the private.
yeah, I think we would try to address both of those and issue, because one of the problems we have with private roads is these essentially flag lots that are being created without maybe reviewing what a flag lot standard should be.
Jason brought this up last time whenever we were kind of brainstorming, but the grandfathering the old lots, even like this scenario tonight, well, we could relay it multiple times. People will either come into the office and talk to you guys about an idea, but not act on it for a couple of years. And then I just don't know where it's right or wrong there. If they kind of, start in the direction of based on the information at the time, but either due to financing or illness, I mean, it doesn't matter the reason, but then the ordinances change and it just it can happen, just keep recycling, so.
Yeah, so right now, kind of where we stand is we will consider a lot legal if it was established if the boundaries were established by 2006. So if we look at a lot and the boundary is the same as it was 2006 or prior, we generally assume that it's probably a legal developable lot. I think when the issues, and this was a recommendation by Commissioner Watterson, that occasionally the uses that are taking place in those lots, because we're looking at the boundaries under that standard, but we're not necessarily looking at the uses, because we have a lot of these old lots that have multiple homes on them. You
On one parcel.
Yeah.
Yeah, on one parcel. So you have a home that was built even early, 1900s, and then you have a second home that was built in the 70s or 80s or 90s or whenever, and then they come in and they're like, hey, we want to tear down this home and rebuild it or remodel it or do whatever, and we're like, sorry, even though your boundaries are okay, the use that's taking place makes it restricted, so we won't necessarily grandfather that in. I mean, it's already been grandfathered in, but the second they want to change it or enhance it, then it becomes an issue.
And so that's what you're talking about trying to fix here, is allow some of those things to happen where it really makes sense. It's just in code, it's not allowed currently.
Yeah, so essentially, if there was a use established on a parcel,
Yeah.
we'd have to be a little careful with it because, like I said, there's already some grandfathering rights that come along with that. Because if a right was established and acted upon and continued, even though the code's changed, that property owner has a right to that. They just don't have a right to change that or if there is, change that or increase the impact of that use in that time. So that is something that we could look at and see what we could come up with to address those concerns.
And my big concern on that is just, can we streamline that? It's not, can we do it? I mean, we can do it under current processes.
Yeah,
current
I've heard a
code.
couple in the last couple of years,
But
where
it's
dad and
very-
mom passed away and the kids wanna split
Yeah.
the 2 or 3
Yeah.
or whatever houses on the farmstead.
And it's
So they can
onerous
sell
for
off
them.
their
It
portion.
costs thousands of dollars
Yeah.
to go through the process to
make that a
for
little
the
easier.
same foregone conclusion that we're going to get to. Is there a way that we can streamline for those and make it less onerous on the
Yeah, I got caught in the Home Depot parking lot in one of those last summer for like 3 hours.
And I think that
I'm
kind
like, I
of,
don't know the code good enough to go for 3.
on this.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know the code good enough off my head to go 3-hour discussion on you splitting your lot off from grandma.
yeah, and I think part of that goes with, we were looking at creating a minor subdivision process that was maybe a more streamlined process for smaller developments like that, where you're just splitting a lot for 2 residential homes, that we could potentially have a lower bar or easier review process.
Yeah, even if it didn't have homes on it yet, it was just a
Yeah,
20-acre A10 that you were splitting into 2 lots for a minor subdivision. Yeah, that seems like it would make sense to have a little more streamlined process. for
One other
some of
one too that may not be extremely pressing, but probably need to keep an eye on is the resort development standards, because over time, that just kind of sneaks in when it's coming and it's bam, and it could easily happen.
yeah, as of right now, we have never really utilized that code. We do have a large section down in Powder Mountain that's zoned that way, and I actually got an email today about coming in to talk to me about the development standards under that code. And I think one of my concerns is like, I actually don't know what this code will do when somebody pushes it, because there are some broad uses. You can do condos under it, you can create a bunch of different uses under the code that we might be worth just looking at, since I don't think it's ever really been utilized since it was written. I don't know, have we ever utilized, think of a time we've utilized it?
I think with Whisper Ridge, I think.
The helicopter
we
guys,
We
yes.
discussed whether it would go, because they had a lot of plans for development there.
We wanted Cherry Peak to go that route as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that probably would have been good. So one thing that is coming through the state that we'll probably want to address is short-term rentals. There are creating some standards for how we're supposed to govern those. And so I'm not going to necessarily put this as a high priority until I see what happens at the state level, because there's at least one bill going through right now that would, if we want to govern short-term rentals, we have to adopt a certain standard in order to do that. So,
Couldn't that one too tie somewhat with the accessory dwellings?
yeah, I think those would be tied together, because we did, so
Can
we,
you highlight that one?
yeah, I can highlight that one.
And in the past, the legislature's angle on short-term rentals I've seen them float bills that basically
Yeah.
forbid local governments from regulating them. And so I think that kind of gives us a little bit of an idea where the legislature stands.
Yeah, the legislature is pretty pro short-term rental. The Utah League, so one of the big issues that they have is under the current state code, we can't use the posting as evidence or as sole evidence that a short-term rental is taking place. You have to gather other evidence. And there's been bills that have been floated to essentially restrict local governments from governing them at all. And so the one that's currently going through would allow a county to govern them, but it'd be under certain requirements. Our code would have to align with what the state would require for that governance. And so, yeah, I would agree. I think the short-term rentals, there's definitely people in the state legislature are big fans, and they can be good. There's some positives. So, I worked in a resort community, and Airbnb was one of our largest tax producers. And so there was some benefits, but there was such a big impact in some of our neighborhoods too. So it was a really difficult balance. But we don't quite have some of those problems here, but I do think it's one of those things to get ahead of.
What about with that short-term rentals? What about though on emergency access and stuff? I mean, shouldn't the county have some say in if this is
I think
accessible?
that's
and-
where if you tied a lot of them to the ADUs, and
Yeah.
a lot of them are just homes, right?
I think in many cases though, whether it's short-term or long-term, it's the same issue, right? If I got 20 cars at the house, it doesn't matter how long they're staying there. If there's 20 cars there, that's where the impact is.
Yeah, and one thing that you'll find with short-term rentals is that their impact can vary depending on their size and the season they operate. Because you'll find that short-term rentals will be incredibly impactful for certain months of the year at peak travel seasons, because they tend to generate more traffic. So when you're visiting somewhere, you're a lot more likely to drive to go biking and then to the store, then to eat and whatever else. And so your trips are more impactful. They tend to use more water during those time periods. However, depending on your season, they'll be less impactful in other times because you'll essentially be a vacant home for some points of the year.
The other concern with that comes though, just thinking of one that's been going on, is it's a private road and I mean, it's close to a mile, well, I don't know, it'd be a mile, but I'll bet it's every bit of half of a mile in there on a private narrow road. And that's just a concern of, winter access, emergency access.
Yeah. And so real quick about the detached ADUs. So when we took this through county council, there was quite a bit of debate about this. They did pass the attached and internal ADU requirements.
Which they had to, because the state changed the code, right?
Yep. But the council essentially said they were not comfortable with approving detached ADUs until additional research was done. When we initially have talked about doing some additional research after talking to Councilmember Gunnell, we would like to do maybe more of a steering committee with this ordinance because of the sensitive nature that it has, and have buy-in from council members and planning commission why we're going through this process and coming up with ideas or strategies to or come up with what those impacts are and how to best mitigate them. I mean, in the end, the planning commission, it is still your prerogative to bring a recommendation to the council, independent of any of staff's considerations. However, my recommendation is that I feel like if we feel like this is an ordinance that we want to have a good chance of getting approved to the council, working with this type of committee is probably the best way and the way that we're most likely to get the best ordinance. And so if that's something the planning commission wants, we can definitely work on that.
Yeah, it's a heavy lift.
Yes.
It makes sense to, have a focused effort on it.
Okay. Were there any others that were as you were looking through this list, that you felt like we needed to spend more time on or needed to review? I think minor subdivision, that was something that was brought up by this group last time that I
That
felt
would be
like
a pretty good one to.
there was some priority given to that.
Could we ask, I'm not suggesting these are priorities, but would you mind just maybe enlighten us on 23 and 24?
Yeah.
Where they're coming from or do we currently have an ordinance? It runs in my mind, well, no, I remember now, because we had out in Amalga, it seems like there was an existing trailer house on the property, and they were wanting to build a new house, and they were gonna reside in the trailer house while they built the new house, but then there was concern you couldn't have two single-family dwellings on the same parcel.
Yeah, so that does become an issue because our code, when we pass the ADU code, it allows them to live in a section of the home while they're remodeling or restructuring the other section, but it's not as applicable as if we had a detached ADU approval, because what you could end up seeing is that if we had detached ADUs, that they would build the ADU first and then live there while they build the rest of their house. But what we're seeing is a lot of people are trying to build like guest house, which is essentially a detached ADU without kitchen facilities. And they're wanting to live there while they're doing remodels or whatever else might happen. We have a couple examples of that happening. Or people want to bring an RV onto their property and live in the RV while the home is under construction. So that's an issue that we've ran into on the enforcement side, and the guest house issue is a little bit nuanced because it's hard to tell when it hits. There's a very thin line when a guest house turned into a detached ADU, because there's even been times where we've told people you have to remove the stove off your plans, and they do, so it meets the standards of a guest house, but
Can't
Put it
go
right
in there
back
5
in.
years later.
That's this house I
Yeah.
was telling you, it's the end of the lane. The county specifically told them, because there was a dwelling there before, and they said, you've got to either take that down or tear your stuff out, and they just made it into a second.
yeah, because
You.
it's hard to know because they'll remove the stove off their plans. We do final occupancies, stove's not there, we give them the CO, they get the stove delivered again next week, and then.
What's the problem
never
though
go
with like an RV? What's the county's
Do you
concern
remember
there?
what our standard is for RV? I'm trying to remember the exact time frame. 180 days.
Say it again?
180 day that runs into the 6-month time limit.
Then if they left for a week, they could come back, or?
So where does,
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question, was what problems we'd had with that, but
where does those tiny homes fit? When they talk about a tiny home, what is that?
they would be a detached ADU
Is it a
is what they would
detached
ADU or is
it
fall
RV?
under.
It depends. In areas, or typically, if
Yeah, guess
the
depends if it's on trailer or
ADU
not.
is secure, or the tiny home is secured on a foundation, then you would consider it an ADU. If it's on wheels, you would consider it a RV.
They couldn't stay there for more
Well-
than 180 days.
If our opinion even counts, personally, I don't know where the problem is if somebody's building a house, whether they're starting it or halfway through it. If they're living in their RV, there's a pretty good chance that's gonna either be gone or moved, or we at least know what's going on.
Or it's always gonna be parked
Versus
there
if they
anyways.
build a accessory dwelling first or a shop and put a dwelling in it, that doesn't go so well because it's just what we've already identified.
Yeah.
Until we get that ordinance up and in force.
Yeah, I think some of the concerns potentially might roll into whether or not they keep the RV on property for permanent living. That does happen where they build their home, but keep their RV as like a side apartment or something too.
There are a few of those around the valley.
So, but no, I get what you're saying, is that typically is a temporary problem.
Is the tighten the ag structure review because of the potential for the ADU in it, or what's?
Yeah, that's essentially what's happening. A lot of people will come in with an ag building and then they'll do enhancements on it later. And so we've been toying around with ideas to do better enforcement on that. Because essentially, if you build an agricultural building, you don't need a building permit for it unless you're putting power or water or some sort of mechanical in it. But if it's just a structure, it's exempt from
So
building permit.
does that change? Because we built a hay shed and I checked with them and the county told me that you had to pay $50 and
So
draw a diagram
it's
just so they knew.
not exempt from our zoning clearance process. So if you say you want to put a hay barn up, you have to get a zoning clearance, which is essentially reviewing where that building is set on the property to ensure it meets setbacks, you're not in wetlands, floodplains, those type of things. But once your zoning clearance is approved, you do not need to get a building permit unless you're getting power, water, mechanical, those things still need a building permit. One of the issues however, there's a thin line. So if you build a barn and you put a horse in it, then it's an agricultural building. But if you build a barn and park your boat and car in it, it's probably not an agricultural building at that point. Then it becomes a garage or an accessory building. And we have several cases where people have built ag buildings, but then done enhancements to them, and now people are living in them too. And I'm not 100% sure what our solution is to resolve this.
Yeah, because even if you have that better review process,
Yeah.
doesn't give you the access that you're looking for to go in there after and
Yeah, and
see what they've done maybe.
sometimes it's really hard to prove too, because we have, our code enforcement officer is looking into a couple of these, and it's hard to know, like, does somebody live there? What is the use, because it's hard to tell necessarily just from the outside or 200 feet away on the public right of
A whole
way.
bunch of old milk barns that are now apartments, but,
Yep.
but they were built some of them 100 years ago. So they've always had water, power, a lot of them a bathroom, originally. Probably the only thing I haven't been in them, I just know imagine that's some of what you're looking at is those type of things, those type of remodels, not necessarily new builds,
Yeah,
that
we're-
are doing it right away to plan on it.
We're dealing with one right now where they had like 5 apartments on the property that they turned an old barn into. And, that's obviously, we went to somebody complained, we went to their property and we saw they had like 5 or 8 mailboxes lined up for it. You're like,
They all, their mailbox even
yeah.
are bold.
Yeah,
At least just go to one mailbox. I mean, come on.
that's right. And so there are some issues with that. This was an idea that as we were talking to our review team, this was a problem that they brought up. And I'm not exactly sure the best way to address this.
That's what I'm wondering, it seems like it's more of a regulatory thing than tightening the ag review, because I don't think you'll catch any of these by making it harder for someone to do an ag building.
Yeah, and that's something
True
I
ag
would
building.
want to avoid, because really, there's a lot of farmers and a lot of property owners that, I don't want to add red tape to get in the way of somebody that is utilizing their property for agricultural purposes. I think the concern just is that we feel like there's at least some bad actors out there that's taking advantage of the system. And it's hard to know, the more red tape we add to prevent the bad actors, that's the more red tape that the
You
good
make it
actors
harder
have
for
to go
99% to try to catch the 1% that,
through. Yeah.
which is not what we want to do, I don't think.
So they're,
I
They're
just
just
bring up
digging holes
the
right
campground and RV thing, just because we committed that we would go back to that one within 6 months, and it's been over a year.
Yeah, so I do think,
And that one has made it all the way through now, right?
yeah,
They
so-
got their CUP recorded.
Did it record it?
Yep, we did change the code to make it prohibited in that zone, right? But if this is something we wanted to open up, the other thing that we run into occasionally is people running private campgrounds that we just don't know about, or they'll have like a property up one of the canyons that's not in the FR40, and they're just letting people go and camp on the property, or even they are like bringing their RVs and living there all summer on that property. And so that currently isn't really regulated by our code. And so if that's something we'd like to maybe address or think of, we've had a few complaints about it in some cases, which is why it's on the list. But I wouldn't say this is an overarching issue in the county, but it might be good. Occasionally we get calls, and if we had some sort of standard, it'd be good to tell them, like, this is what we allow.
They had the report that there's gonna be 3 campgrounds built in Sardine Canyon, right? Are any of those in the Cache County side? Did you hear that from the legislature the other day? It was in one of their meetings. They said, yeah, there's gonna be 3, some trail system they're trying to hook together. There's gonna be 3 campgrounds through Sardine Canyon. I thought, well, we hadn't heard anything about it up on this end. I can't remember which legislator it was now. I'll have to go back and see which meetings I was in the last 2 weeks, try to remember, but, that would be in our FR40, I would assume, but
Yeah, probably.
be allowed. But yeah, I think if there's not if we've taken it out so it's not allowed where we wouldn't want it down here anyways. And
I don't know if
Alone
that's the
FR40.
case.
yeah, that's what he said. He took it out, but I guess
don't
we
know
can-
if that's the case that we don't want it there. I think we want to.
we wanna look
wanna
at where
it
we
and see
might want it.
Where it's appropriate, to have those, We've seen there's a pretty substantial need for that in the area. All of the existing RV parks that are out there are full all the time.
And we could potentially, like, one of the issues was that it was just so close to other residences. And it'd be pretty easy within a conditional use process to, let's say, like, it has to be, half a mile away from a city boundary and has to meet, or whatever it might be. We could come up with standards to limit the impact if we still want to allow for more RV park type of options or campgrounds within the A10 zones. So there's a few ideas, and obviously this is just kind of a brainstorm list, but
It's not on the list, I don't know if it needs to be, but over the years, well, there was one time where we tried to identify pit areas, gravel pit areas, you know, just to alleviate some of the concern when people decided that they did want to open a pit in that area, but the thing about that is the gravel's where the gravel is, so if we're still thinking along them lines, I don't remember what, you guys remember us talking about that?
Sure, yeah, I mean, because the mineral, the.
Mineral
areas-
zones,
The
yeah.
area that we show as having good mineral potential for for things
Yeah.
like gravels is the entire valley, you know, around the, you know, the foothills,
Perimeter.
all the way around
Yeah,
the whole
yeah,
valley. And
yeah.
so it's a massive area, it's a very visible area. We have a lot of pits there now, so.
It's just-
Is there a need to?
Well, all I'm saying
Address
is,
that.
it'll be controversial every time somebody tries to start a new one, no question. But
They are.
is it a concern that we need to do any more than we've already done? Probably not. I just simply, as we're talking about this, bring it up, where we just got through with the one out in Newton.
We do have,
one-
we do spend a lot of time on those when they come before us, it seems like.
So our noise ordinance that I have listed up here was kind of spurred on by some of those conversations to try to prevent some of the nuisances of gravel operations. Because if you remember that last time, we had that gravel that came in through Newton, and we had a lot of discussion about what type of decibel level. And my opinion at the time was that I just didn't feel comfortable with imposing some sort of standard on a gravel operation that we came up with just in that meeting necessarily, but I would be very comfortable with doing something like that if we went through the proper, if we discussed it and came up with some sort of standard that we could evenly apply to all pits. However, once again, if we impose these type of standards, gravel pits are needed and something that is generally beneficial, but we just want to ensure that they're not a nuisance to the general public.
Very interesting with this commission especially is there's lots of stuff going on, but it seems like there's never a focus or a true focus until something happens. We had the dog situation 8-10 years ago, and man, that was on fire, and that's where the noise ordinance kind of come to be, and this and that, and smells, and distance from the property line, and then every time a gravel pit comes up, it's a fire. We had the Whisper Ridge, and there was issues there, but overall, I think the county's done a good job just kind of meeting with it. But some of that stuff, I don't know, it's pretty hard to foretell what's coming, but like the the skiing on the end, on the south end of the valley, that's probably gonna happen, or could.
Yeah, I think that one is important because we're gonna be forced to deal with it.
Yeah,
pretty
and,
soon. I would-
you know, there's been rumblings that there's been some ownership changes and property, and people with some money are now investing in that property and are gonna expect,
Quite a ways this way.
yep.
From the
I think
calls that I have
the-
received.
The noise ordinance, you know, coming up with a comprehensive noise ordinance on that, I think would be good. I mean, we basically developed it in, through the kennels. And
It
so
was,
This is.
100%.
This is what, and it's not based on anything other than what our discussion was, but, I mean, we have, there are a lot of significant things, whether it be gravel pits or some of the recreation facilities that we have with, you know, just what they bring in. I know in my neighborhood, the Cutler Reservoir, they bring in these drag boats that, I mean, you can't have a conversation because they're so loud. And so, you know, the conditional use for a recreation facility should also have some sort of a noise control on that, ordinance on that as well.
Yeah, if we could adopt potentially a more broad noise ordinance, that could,
Jason brings up a really good point, though, whether it be the gravel pit, whether it be them boats, whether it be the dogs. It's kind of hard to plan for every scenario, even if we establish a baseline, because Well, we had a dog kennel that went out in Trenton, and they, to this day, don't have a neighbor within probably 2-3 miles, and probably won't. So, I mean, yeah, we can say there's a noise ordinance, but it's not as necessary right there as if somebody moves next to a subdivision or a group of houses, so
Yeah.
how do we,
I
well,
think that's- I
even the
think that's
gravel
the
pit out
point
there.
is maybe crafting some sort of a noise ordinance around these things, at least under CUPs, that gives us a guidance. I mean, we came up with 10 decibels at the property line, which basically means you double the sound level twice. And so, you know, that's pretty significant, actually. So.
Okay. Were there any other priorities that you'd want us to look at? I mean, there's a lot on this list, and I would be surprised if we were able to get through all of them in a year, but we can take some of these key ones and focus on them and try to bring in some good code changes that could have a positive impact.
Gotta start somewhere.
Well, again, I think there's even a few more, and it's nice to leave them separated, but even the ag buildings, it's also affiliated with the ADUs.
Yeah.
So like, there was like 3 of these that tied kind of to the ADUs, your minor subdivisions along with the private roads. Some of them probably gonna, kill more than one of them at a time by focusing on them few.
Yeah, and I do think there are a lot of these that have overlap, because I think you're right, the detached ADU will help resolve some of the ag structure issues and some of the short-term rental issues, and there's a few things that if we were to go through that process, there could be some overlap with that. And same with like the noise ordinance and conditional use permit standards or flag lot and private roads. So there's a lot of overlap on this list too. Okay, I would say, anything else that you feel, any other comments or recommendations?
There'll be some others that come up that we don't know about yet till someone comes in to want to do something.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a living list, this is a living document, so,
All the time.
yeah, we're always open to, by state law, you guys are the planners of the county and are the ones who come up with the code to make recommendations to the county council on land use items. So if there are issues that you feel are important, please let us know, and we're more than happy to help through this process. Okay.
Brady mentioned one, can I have a?
Come on up. I knew you didn't come just to listen to us.
Brady, you mentioned how Estancia somehow got converted into a county road, but maybe it started out as a private road.
Yeah,
There's a current resolution that the county council passed a few years back that pretty much outlaws or says that they're prohibited from any private roads becoming a county road. So there's, right now, even if someone wanted to, they would have to go through the county council and get that changed or that resolution taken away. So that gives a little bit of security on the private roads. So that's, I knew you were concerned about that and just wanted to let you know there is some policy on the books at the county that that's not allowed and won't be even entertained at this point, so.
well, you weren't here, I wasn't here.
Yeah,
Chris and Jason, I think, was, but even then, it's kind of a bad deal because it's a bad deal for the bad deal is for the people that bought the lots out there.
right.
They're the ones that got the brunt of it.
Yep. And-
So just, whatever we can do to prevent,
Right.
that's where we gotta stop it or prevent it, is if they say they're gonna do a county road, we gotta hold them to their standards, or otherwise the people get burned and then they're left holding the bag twice.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is that we started talking about the private roads. I don't think the standards for the private roads, like how we construct them, the materials, the slopes, the grades are necessarily the problem. It's how they're being used. And I know that when the road manual got pushed through last time fairly rapidly, the planning and zoning, did not approve it. So I don't know if maybe some of the road manual needs to come back and we have more discussions, have engineering come. And kind of that whole private road is, I think it's how they're being used to get frontage is more of, it's how do we want to allow private roads more than how we're constructing them.
We didn't have any say in that. We were just told it was happening.
You guys denied it, so that's, since Rhodes is up there, I wanted to bring that up too, is if, you know, if we wanted to go through, there is some few edits that we need to make, and if we're looking at private roads, maybe it warrants a deeper dive into the whole road manual so that you guys can feel comfortable, and maybe this time we would get a plain commission stamp of approval when we go back for edits to the county council. But last time you guys denied it, so.
Are a lot of those the ways they're doing it associated with the flag lot things for getting those?
Yeah,
So if we tied those together so that those,
Yeah.
the people could still develop their ground, that
yeah.
makes sense for a single lot maybe, and,
I,
but get them tied together so that makes sense for the road department
from
too.
what I see, mostly it's frontage, but Stephen and Angie could speak to that
Yeah.
more so, but they're trying to do private roads to gain frontage requirements. And so they need frontage on some type of a road, but it's not necessarily how they're constructed. I feel like that's pretty good. And there's fairly decent road standards on slopes and grades and materials. Those things seem fine. It's how they're being used, but I wouldn't mind if we needed to come back engineering or in conjunction with Stephen and Angie and Connor, come back and just go through some sections of the road manual so you guys can see how they're used, how that's applying.
I would like that. If we
Yeah,
could.
and then maybe,
Especially to work with you.
And
Yeah,
maybe-
because we've got one right here, Brady, in Petersboro that we're looking at going, you know, because we can see the piles of dirt out there right now, and Brady and I are looking at it going, how are they doing, making that work?
Yeah.
maybe
Looks like
bring,
something to
bring some of the
plan.
examples so we can see how they've used it and then the solution to what it would have been to do it differently, maybe still.
Okay. If thanks.
That'd be good.
Was anything else for this item?
That'll keep us busy probably.
Yeah, probably.
See what comes out of legislation.
And I'm sure this list will,
A couple after March, but
yeah, I'm sure this list will change up a little bit, but we'll get started on a couple of these roadway issues. And we'll start coordinating the detached ADU item, because I feel like that's gonna take a little bit of time to go through too.
and I think if it doesn't happen this year, eventually the legislature's gonna pass something that says you'll allow them, so
I could,
we can at least be working. Seems like they're pushing pretty hard there eventually, so
yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
if we can keep working.
One thing that'd be real interesting, you guys ask us what we feel. What do you feel? Angie and you guys that have been involved with this, what do you feel or see?
As far as priorities,
Yeah.
If you're gonna ask me to come back up again, I do think there's a couple of areas, especially out by Val J's house, ranch, out that way, that are still in A10. The Clarkston Mountains, almost all the way up to Gunsight Peak and stuff that are still in A10, so I think he had something about the general plan up there, but I think that's an area that should probably be looked at, the zoning. Cause if someone wants to come in and build all halfway up the Clarkston Mountains and it's A10, it could put us all in a little bit of a heartburn. And I think so I think there's some area out there that probably should be maybe looked at for zoning and switch to FR40.
Saying those dirt roads going up to that aren't that great?
Well, if the semi can't get over it, gets high centered up there, and
It's even more north.
is that an
Come on,
indication?
you can't get up in a minivan on some of your car.
I know what you're talking.
Pulled out 2 semis in 3 weeks on the long divide. The GPS tells them the long divide, they can do it.
Could I bring up one area of concern that may be coming before us? Pacific Corp, Utah Power, Rocky Mountain Power has proposed putting a large generation facility, you know what, I can't
Pump
remember the
back.
exact term.
Pump
Yeah,
storage.
pump storage
Yeah,
project,
with a massive reservoir on top of.
3,000
on-
acre feet.
Yeah, up on top of
Yeah,
Black Rock, the West Hills, and
It's,
On our ranch.
it's, yeah. it'd be
on your ranch,
on his-
yeah.
Yeah.
His field.
And you know, there's a lot of there's a lot that goes on with that whole relicense process, and it's FERC regulated and all of that, but I don't think we have any tools to regulate those things. I wonder about whether reservoirs or hydroelectric should be have its own section, because we could be hit with that one.
Do you know, is any of that on public lands or is it on private?
It would all be on private, I think.
The pump storage, they want to put it on private because they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah. And
I've actually signed a agreement for their studies. They've been up there doing the geological study right now.
so the generator would be right where their generation is now at the dam, the generation plant and the pump.
So it would,
They would pump it up during the night when power's cheap, and it comes back down during the day when power's
But
expensive
as
and they
far
need
as
it.
as far as the scale of it, the existing Cutler plant is a 10 megawatt, and
Three.
this, what's that?
3,
Three? I thought it was a 10. And this one
30.
will be, yeah, it's
'Cause you-
about 10 orders, of-
'Cause
about 10x
Your head
an
is
order
just
of
so big
magnitude.
coming down there.
larger than what we currently have
They
there.
want 600 feet of
The fall.
fall.
And, you know, this is, they're proposing these
No,
in
sorry.
multiple
I thought
places.
1100.
600 feet of head,
Yeah.
1,200 feet of
I was
fall.
gonna say, I was thinking it was just over
They're-
1,000 feet.
But
One
this-
one of the other places is up in the Oneida
Narrows,
Narrows.
yeah.
And that
so-
one they've already filed the paperwork for. 'cause
With
it's
our
further
discussion
back.
on this though, it's been within the last 6 months that we talked about how the county could have precedence ahead of, like if they brought another gas line through or they did something like that. Would that tie in with this or how?
Well, that's kind of what I was
That was
wondering,
on-
is if,
yeah.
is if there needs to be a
Public land.
code section around large, I mean, we have a utility overlay
Yeah,
zone.
we have a utility overlay zone and a definition that would govern something like that.
But I don't think that includes reservoir operations or hydroelectric. But it's something that I just wondered if there ought to be something, so we actually have a say in that. It's at least part of, the county's at least part of the process in what happens there. You know, they will be coming back with many plans for their recreation
Yeah, and
facilities
it probably
and all
sits
of
right on the
those
county
things.
boundary, doesn't it?
Yeah, it'll be in both
I was
counties.
gonna say, it's probably right on the county line, the reservoir side, as I remember it.
Actually,
Or is it mostly in Box Elder?
it's actually mostly gonna be in Box Elder,
And the pipeline will all be in Box Elder
all Box Elder.
and the facilities, so.
And
part of
Box
it-
Elder won't say anything.
Yeah, so it's, well, it'll be on 283 acre parcel, that little piece, they wanna put it on. 3,000 acre feet, so that's essentially, and they'll be able to empty it in 12 hours. So that's essentially Newton Dam empty.
It's a big pipe.
And, you know, I guess the point is, you know, if our job is to look at impacts, I think that's a potentially major impact that can happen in a relatively, I mean,
They just got their,
meetings I've attended.
they just got their FERC permit approved finally for Cutler. So they'll be filing the paperwork for this process to start pretty shortly.
So a couple of the items, I think flag lots and private roads is probably one of my priorities. We've had some discussion about sensitive lands internally. I'm not
Say
exact.
6 is your priority?
No, just the private roadways, so flag lots and private roadway design.
Okay.
7, I would feel like is something that needs review, but it's a pretty heavy lift and will take quite a bit of work on our part to come up with
Can't we
some.
just say they can do it as long as Matt signs off on it?
I mean, technically we probably could, but,
All right, we'll look at it a little deeper than that. but
Since
We're
then,
gonna
tie
make
with
him sign off in
riparian.
the end anyways.
yeah, riparian, that's gonna be addressed. There's a bill right now in the state that is addressing riparian zones.
Pretty quick though.
And, what?
That bill's dying pretty fast.
Yeah,
having
I'd be
modified.
surprised if
I
that
don't
went
think
through.
it'll
There's
pass.
also a bill about like wildlife protection corridors that could potentially fall under sensitive lands too. I'm not sure where that's gonna end up. But one of the other ones that that will likely bring, I don't think it's gonna be too big of a lift, that our code enforcement officer is working on. Now I can't see it. I don't know oh, right here, number 5, civil code update. Essentially, we have a civil penalty section, but it's a kind of a one-size-fits-all. And I would say there's probably aspects of it that don't necessarily comply with the process that we're supposed to undertake. So we're undertaking the process that we're supposed to take anyways, but the code doesn't outline what that is. So our code enforcement officer is looking at that, and so we may bring something in. Like I said, I don't think it's going to be that extensive of a code change. It's just really we need to highlight maybe a greater fee schedule depending on what the violation is, and better civil review and appeal process. That's one of the things I feel like our code is lacking. Essentially, if you issue a civil penalty, that's just an administrative fine, and they have to come in and pay it until the violation is cured. But we have to have certain steps that we have to follow so that we don't violate their due process.
This would have helped on Whisper Creek when they did those violations, if we'd had a penalty on them.
On the Whisper Ridge,
Whisper Ridge, yes.
blatant.
Yeah.
They just kept coming back and back, and if we'd had a penalty on it,
Yep.
I still
And,
can't believe we did,
like-
or somebody didn't.
exactly, so.
In other examples, we had somebody who had a bunch of junk on their property. They got served a final notice like 3 years ago. And when I started, technically their fine was like $80,000, and the county just had never done anything about it. And so we essentially just we sent them an email we sent them a letter saying we were resetting it and gonna give them another chance, because we just, there's no way we're gonna be able to collect that. And it actually worked. This person is now cleaning up their property and is removing all the junk and is making good progress on it. But I feel like if we have a good process in place, because that's part of the problem with code enforcement, is just running into the process. It's not as quite as easy as just, issuing somebody a ticket most of the time. So I feel like that's something that we need to update, because we have a lot of people out there there are some people who are just trying to utilize their property the way they want to utilize it. And, that's one thing, but we have a lot of people who are blatantly disregarding county code, and we're having a hard time
That would be my
enforcing.
concern with updating that one carefully, so you can parse those two out.
Yeah.
Right, the ones that are, we'll call them habitual violators that are doing it, trying to almost make a point to the county. But if it's not one that's a, safety type issue.
Yeah, we've
I
had
don't want to have a code enforcer feeling like he's got a lot more power to ticket people and driving around the county looking to find people.
yeah.
I don't think that's what we want to have so we want to,
Well, you can still have it in there,
Figure
because
that
you've
out.
got some warnings or some chances of.
or even a process to where, there's a second or third level review before it goes through the fine process.
Yeah.
Start that, so
Yeah, and
coming in and saying, well, I saw this and this and this today, so I'm gonna send out these 3 warnings today, and if they, haven't fixed it, and depending on what it is, like you said, it may not be that critical.
Yeah.
If it's a junkyard, it probably needs to be cleaned up, but.
yeah, so like I said, this, I think from a writing and presenting will be a pretty easy lift. It's not too complicated to add this process in. But that's probably something that staff will likely bring in the next few months. Okay. Are there any other questions or discussion?
I just had one more real quick, just a thought. Well, it was actually, and it kind of tied in with the minor subdivisions, but it was the county villages.
Okay.
I know, our prior
Tim?
fellow was extremely into this, and I mean, I appreciate that, but I don't know if the county's ready for that even. I mean, we look at all these areas, Petersboro, Estancia, whatever else, we haven't approved a subdivision or haven't approved a housing thing much over 6 or 7 in the last number of years. But with everything that we got on there, one thing that I just had a quick thought of is, I know we're not biologists, and when we've had, like Cherry Peak or whatever, we've had the Fish and Game or the foresters involved, but there's still quite a bit of wildlife in this valley. there's getting to be a lot less due to development and such. Do we have any concern for that as a county?
Yeah, and that's actually something, our COSAC, our Cache Open Space Advisory Committee,
Would it be pheasants or deer or whatever else?
that's one thing that is on their list of things to review when people come in for open space applications is wildlife habitat. And there's a bill right now at the state, I would be surprised if it passed. But there's a bill right now that would require that any code updates or reviews or master plans would account for wildlife habitat and corridors. And that's something I mean, it's part of our history heritage. I mean, when you drive into Hiram, for example, pretty much every gateway at Hiram has a large elk, a large bronze elk statue, because, the elk has been part of this, the
They
history
want
of
to see
this
some
valley.
railroads, they just gotta go out to Nolan's house.
Yeah.
Got a bunch of them.
Or the Clausens in Hiram.
But regardless, it just doesn't, looking back on the last 10 years or so, it just doesn't appear that anything we've done there has really accounted for that, or it's just wiped out more of their habitat, so.
And that's something we could even look at sensitive lands, because there are some prescribed, like, endangered species habitat within the county that we require any development that is adjacent or within those areas has to go have a biologist go and do a review of the habitat to ensure they're not endangering, like, nesting of, like, the yellow-billed cuckoo. That's the one that's in the county. And so if they want to build next to these trees, we have to have a biologist go and make sure it's not going to disrupt that habitat because they're protected. And so there's already a few things, but you're right, some of these large game corridors are really difficult to preserve because it's so easy to interrupt them. And so that is something maybe even with the sensitive lands ordinance that we could look at.
That one could become a really big, yeah, depending on what you focused on.
Yeah, I would say it'd probably be a little controversial, I'm sure.
Yeah, what level, whether it was, the threatened species, endangered species, or all species.
Yeah, because even federally protected species, when we require biologists to go through, we get pushed back on those requirements. Okay. Well,
It's good.
yeah, thank you. We'll start working on these, and we'll hopefully in the next couple months, we'll start bringing a few draft ordinances forward for consideration.
Excellent. So, okay, do we need to fill out these two forms, or are they just for us to look at this month?
Yeah, so just as, so our code, as you all know, you are a public official that's appointed by the county to serve the public purpose. And by state law, you're required to disclose any conflicts of interest that you have. County code goes a little bit further and states that, let me see where the best part to start reading. So this is in 6250, interest in business entities regulated by county disclosure. So every appointed or elected officer or employee of Cache County who is an officer, director, agent, or employee, or the owner of substantial interest in any business entity, sorry, it's a little hard to read across the room, regarding Cache County shall.
What's the layman interpretation?
So essentially, it states that you have to disclose, and again during January of each year. So the reason we didn't do it in January is not everybody was appointed at that point, and now everybody's appointed, so we felt like we're a day late, but it's probably good to still bring in the disclosure form. And so essentially, if you have stake in a business that is regulated by Cache County or other conflicts that has a value of $2,000 or more, then it just has to be disclosed. And the code requires us to do this every year in case those disclosures change. And so, I know one or two of you might have had a few questions that you wanted to talk about. We can set, and if you do have any questions about what you need to disclose, we can set up a meeting with the county attorney and our Human Resources Department who manages this, and we can go through those in detail. But for most of you, I'm assuming it probably well, most of you probably don't have any big conflicts.
Well, we talked about this in our meeting before this meeting. And previously, there's been different interpretations. People have acted differently depending upon that. Some, if they've had a business dealing with an applicant outside of anything related to what we're talking about, they've excused themselves. What's your interpretation? Are we to take this, that if somebody comes here and we've ever done business with them or could do business with them, do we need to disclose that? Or is it only if the business involves what they're here about?
So generally speaking, it really just, I would say, if you have a broader interpretation, you're going to be safer. Because essentially, if you have a conflict, that doesn't prevent you from voting. It just requires you to disclose. So typically, if you have an applicant who's coming in that you have partnered with in some other business form, and your decision could affect that partnership, I would always recommend disclosure is a better option. Even if you think, well, it doesn't really involve this item, just disclosing it would be a good idea. I wish Taylor was here, then he could probably answer this a little bit more specifically. But generally speaking, I think disclosure is better. But it really just comes down to, I can look up the state law and maybe send it over and see what it says. But there are probably circumstances where you don't have to disclose, where it might be better too anyway.
Well, I think of Chris, and I've always respected him especially, because he belongs to an engineering firm, he's always acknowledged, hey, this is a client of my firm, whether he's dealt with them individually or not. I'm just looking at, how specific do you want us to be?
Yeah,
Lean towards the side of disclosure.
Lean towards just disclosing whatever.
But there's disclosure and then there's recusing yourself
Yep.
from voting.
Yep, and Utah law does not require you to recuse yourself. You can on a person.
Folks do.
Yeah, you
If
can.
you were involved with the project, you should probably better.
Yeah, you mean,
Then you for
I
sure
would
should.
say there's a legal question and an ethical question. And
If it's your project.
yeah, if it's your project, all I'll recommend is that you follow the law, and then I would leave it up to you to decide whether or not you should recuse yourself. Many do, some don't. Actually, according to Utah law, if we didn't have a quorum without your vote, the chair could force you to vote and participate. Most of the time when I've seen that happen, they're willing to continue the item until the next meeting instead of taking that step. But technically by Utah law, if we didn't have a quorum without you, if you're recusing yourself,
You could get made to vote.
yep, you would be forced to vote on the item.
And I would just say that I think we've always been very careful about that. I mean, if we've had a family member that had a proposal coming in, I had one, and, I took a seat to when that item was coming up, even though we probably don't need to.
Yeah, and it's very true. Like, I've seen council members who were the actual applicant vote on their applications. They disclosed it, but then they voted on it, and
It's legal.
that, it was perfectly legal.
Public heat for that, but
Yeah, I would say they did get some public heat for it, but, and
The
I,
appearance of a conflict sometimes is
yep.
better to avoid.
Yeah, so some of that is a personal question. There is a legal standard that I would advise you to always follow. And I think it generally is probably good practice, but I understand that occasionally that's not always practical to always recuse yourself, so.
But on disclosure, though, I would always lean toward.
yeah, disclosures,
Disclose
it's
it.
easy to disclose it, and then
Then
you can still vote if you want.
whether it needs to be or not, then you've certainly met the standard there of disclosing.
Okay. Any other questions about that?
So you want us to sign it tonight, or do we need to wait and read the law?
So you're welcome to sign it tonight. If you want, we can plan on next time doing a larger presentation on,
Or at least, maybe having Taylor here so we can ask him some questions. Because the way I read, I would probably sign number 2 Because I have an interest in a business that is regulated by I get a business license from Cache County.
Yeah.
So I would assume
Yeah,
I would
so
mark yes on number 2.
In that case, yeah, you probably would have.
And then
even
then I
though-
have to fill out this other statement, because
Yep.
if you mark yes on any of them, then you fill out both forms, it looks like. Okay.
Yeah, that,
And ma-
my thinking
and
too,
maybe
like,
even
if
number
he was
4
here,
with
I would
Water
just-
District.
I would just ask him to give some examples
Yeah,
of each one of these, just so.
So I think
you're
we'll-
like,
yeah,
okay, how many of these
wait
do I
till-
need to
Let's
check
maybe
or
give
not?
him 10 or 15 minutes next month.
Are you okay
just
if we
so
leave
can-
leave these for you then?
Yep, I can grab them.
don't have to print
And
them out
then,
again.
yeah, we'll just do some time to do some training on it.
Make sure we all do it right.
Yeah.
Or we're closer to right than we'll do it on our own.
And then Chair, before we close the meeting, I just have a quick announcement that I wanted to make.
You're leaving too?
No.
That's a good thing, because we
hope
weren't,
you're not
we weren't
expect-
gonna let you make that announcement.
Hope you're not expecting.
All right, well, you can make an announcement.
I know most of you know, but I just wanted to formally announce that Tim Watkins had resigned from the county and is now working for a different organization, and we wish him well on his new career. But we wanted to congratulate Angie Zetterquist, who you all know and love. We hired her as our planning manager, so she'll be serving as a new role. I know she already indicated that we've asked Connor to step up and help with planning commission and his role as the current planner and his duties. And so,
So are you still gonna add another one, or has Connor just gotta do his old job and the new one?
it's actually, we're
They
taking,
doubled your wages.
we're taking this opportunity to reevaluate how some of our planning office is formatted. Because we have, like our countywide planning services is currently lacking a planner too. And so we have a couple openings in the planning department. And so we're looking at how we want to fill those seats and those roles right now.
Don't you think though, right now with the economy where it's at, I mean, just from seeing our load here and seeing what's going on, it's black and white from what it was 2 years ago.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that we're considering is we're evaluating our current workloads to see if that is a position that we want to fill at the time. Like our building department also has a vacancy, and that's something that we're considering too, is we're waiting to kind of see what building permit levels look like.
Maybe it's lucky you're lean
Yeah, and so.
right now.
'cause, yeah, the last thing we want to do is hire and be in the long term overstaffed. It's okay to be overstaffed for a short period of time, especially with the building inspectors, but that's not something you want to do long term. Okay, thank you.
What's next month look like?
Yeah, you may.
Presentation on conflicts, and we just have a couple of subdivisions and a conditional use, the cell tower and then subdivision. Coming back.
Seen that?
Okay, perfect. Well, with no complaints, we will adjourn then.
Go to the studio. I'll go grab the audio.